Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of our Life West Leadership Line. And today I have a formidable couple, family, father-daughter duo, whatever you want to say. Today I have two very, very special guests who I go way, way back with. I have, of course, Dr. Gerry Clum, first president of Life West, 30 years, one of the major instrumental people who helped Life College at the time, back in 1970, in the mid 70s, get their accreditation. And he was in chiropractic education, of course, politics and everything else around chiropractic. With us today, he's a 1973 Palmer graduate. Gerry, always great to see you and to have you with us. So thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Ron. Great to be with you.
And then if I can say, I have a wonderful, wonderful person from your family. The princess, I'm not sure. We don't want to uproot Kathy's seat in any way, but I have Dr. Lauren Clum. Lauren, it's great to see you. Lauren is a 2005 Life West graduate. She's been doing amazing things the last 16 years in chiropractic, from private practice to teaching to now she's the dean of our clinic at the college, and is just doing phenomenal things. So it's great to have you with us today, Lauren.
Thank you so much. I'm super honored at the invitation and excited to be here with both of you.
Well, I have to tell you, I'm just excited to be in the presence of two Clums. It's just it's so cool. So what we really want to do today is talk about chiropractic. Of course, that's what we're going to talk about. But I want to talk about like the past, the present, and the future. Of three main topics. One is education. One is the practice environment, right? And then I want to talk about technology. And I don't know why that just kind of came up, but technology I think is important because as we go back, I know, Gerry, you'll be able to talk to us about technology that you had going on in the early 70s at Palmer and what was happening around there. And as the schools moved on, I mean, my gosh, when you started at Life College, there probably wasn't even many computers there, in those days, right?
Right.
And then where we are today. I mean, obviously, everyone is so well connected, but what we're doing and where we're moving forward to, and and what it looks like, in the future. So I think those would be three cool topics that we can hit. And I'd love to start off with education. So where we were, where we are, and where we're going, right? That kind of thing. And Gerry, I'd love to turn it over to you to just kind of talk about where you saw us, back in the 70s, or where, not where you saw us, where we actually were from your lens. And then as we progress forward, and then Lauren, I want to talk to you also about where do you see us going? Because we're doing some pretty cutting edge things at Life West, obviously with our, clinically inspired learning program and all these different things, but just talk about where we're going and we'll add things in between. So Gerry, I want to turn over to you. Where did you see the progression in the 70s into the 80s into the 90s being in education?
Yeah. Well, thank you again for the opportunity and the chance to reflect back. I started at Palmer in in October of 1970, and to think at that time, all 50 states were not licensed. The Department of Education did not recognize the Doctor of Chiropractic degree. The accrediting agencies across the country, the regional accrediting agencies did not recognize chiropractic education. The Council on Chiropractic Education was not recognized as an agency by the Department of Education. The Veterans Affairs did recognize a degree program for the training of veterans. And the Immigration and Naturalization Service, the INS of that time, did recognize us for the training of non-nationals here on campus or wherever the campus was. And chiropractic was classified by the Department of Education as a spurious degree. There were about 17,000 chiropractors in the United States in 1970. And it was a clawing and scratching, get established environment. Think that Louisiana and Mississippi were without licensure. New York had recently gained licensure. And the profession was very much in its establishment phase. And I think that rather than looking at it as past, present, and future, in this context, I look at it in the context of the establishment phase, the growth phase, and the maturation phase. And it was my good fortune to participate in the tail end of the establishment phase. You remember Charlie Kolb from the faculty at Life in Marietta?
Absolutely.
Back in the 70s. Charlie and I had the privilege of presenting the first authorized continuing education program in the state of Mississippi in the history of the profession. So I have that tie back to those early days, and saw the profession come through those periods, saw us come through the establishment phases, the initial recognition of the CCE, then ultimately the recognition by the regionals, and the inclusion of students in the student loan programs. And then as each of those moved in the profession, moved through across the profession, it opened new doors for us. It opened new opportunities for us. And the people at the regional accrediting agencies realized we didn't have horns, and that we were pretty reasonable and logical people, and we were doing our best to bring our programs to our students in as effective and efficient a way as possible. The CCE was doing its job to try and regulate the profession across the country and bring clinical standards in and educational standards and so on.
Gerry, so in those days, who was leading the charge? You know, when you talk about, you came in at the very tail end of, we'll say, a phase one, right?
Yeah.
You know, who was leading the charge? Was it, you know, Dr. Williams? Was it Dr. Parker? Who was kind of taking this and going to, obviously we had to go through politics and we had to be at Capitol Hill and do all these things. Yeah. How did it come about?
Well, in chiropractic education, the leadership circles generally, Joe Jancy was a huge influence and was a dominating player of that time, had been in the position as president of National for decades. And if talking about the evolution that I saw, you know, he saw the very earliest recognition of those initial states to be licensed. So Jancy was a huge factor in those days. And on a political leadership side, the ICA was far stronger in those days, much higher participation, and was, I believe, larger than the ACA at that time. And the ACA didn't form until the mid-'60s. And when that came about and there was the split between the ACA rebranded from the NCA to the ACA, and there was a significant split with Dr. Parker taking significant components of ICA with him to ACA and so on. That's really when the profession, we started to have a differentiation on a far more significant level than we had before. And then as time went on, each of the organizations carved out more and more of the political landscape. ACA had always held to a position of states' rights, and that chiropractic was whatever a state said it was. And ICA had held to a position that a state can say chiropractic is anything it wants to. It doesn't change the fact, from an ICA perspective, that chiropractic was a defined, measurable, identifiable body of knowledge and skill. And those kinds of thought processes have just continued to permeate throughout education, throughout the politics, and so on, to the point where we are today. And in some ways, we see the natural progression of those changes maturing out over time. And when I say that, I don't mean that's a positive thing. I'm just saying it's a natural evolution thing. And, you know, so the leadership shifted. NCA, ACA became more significant in the 60s. And then we moved into the 70s. And in the 70s, we had the beginning rumblings of the Wilk suit. We had the activities of the AMA Committee on Quackery. And we had the movement forward on the part of the profession dealing with a common enemy. From the time that the ACA started to the time of the Wilk suit, we were each other's enemies. Wilk had a tendency to create an enemy, if you will, and in the truest sense of my enemy's enemy is my friend. There was cooperative activity between the associations in response to the challenges from the outside, from AMA and so on. So those processes continued to unfold in different circles. The leadership didn't change a great deal. Dr. Jancy was active until his later years of his career. And then it shifted gears within the ACA significantly, went through a lot of different hands. And this is a time that Dr. Williams was in ascendancy in his leadership in the early 80s. And during that period of time, ICA saw a very significant burst in enrollment, in membership and influence. And we had the development of different state associations. And we came back to a period where we had the two schools of thought in the defined scope and the it is what it is whatever the law says it is approach. And that continued to play out across the board and throughout education, throughout licensure. And the struggle to bring those two perspectives forward influenced education, influenced licensure, influenced the politics, influenced reimbursement across the board.
And, it seems like, and Lauren, I'm going to get you in a second, but it seems like it's the same story, right? That we tend to get in our own way, right?
Yes.
And it's like, and I know that's part of growing, right? I mean, if you look at our profession and you kind of go, well, when you start off and you get to be 10 years old, you know enough to be dangerous, enough to be cruel at times, and you also know enough to be able to look for love and try to find out what we need, what I need to do to keep growing. Yeah. And it seems like as we went through that, look, from what you just said, Gerry, we, because we had our own internal struggles, almost like, everyone else could sit back and just watch this circus go on, so to speak.
That's right.
And kind of happen like that. And, and I know that's part of growth. I mean, it's not like we did anything to ourselves. It's just the natural maturation, right? As we grow. Lauren, have you experienced any of that, as, being a 2005 grad, you've been around for 16 years, and what are you experiencing now in education?
Sure. So, having grown up in a chiropractic family, like a lot of what my dad's talking about is familiar to me from and experiencing it in part of my formative growing up years, not that I was actually a part of it as a practitioner. And so then by the time I got to school, my experience was a bit different because so much growth had happened, right? We were in a phase of, like to use your example, the 10-year-old is so ready to be an adult, but is still kind of used to being a kid. And so there's this element of, I have this history of thinking that we're salmon swimming upstream and that it's always this uphill battle and like the cards are stacked against us or whatever the case may be. But then my actual experience of it wasn't that. We were in a position that, it was readily accessible. It was readily accepted. Just a different landscape, coming into it from an educational standpoint, and then a practice standpoint thereafter. So, having that history and knowing it in, who I am as an individual, but then really in my becoming a chiropractor years was a very different experience. I wasn't up against any of those kinds of obstacles. Yeah. The obstacles were more, like you were saying, in that growth phase of, okay, where do we go from here? Do we want, as a 10-year-old growing up, do we really want to be an adult? Do we really want to be a part of like the super standard healthcare scene? And as we kind of like ascended toward that, then it was this, in my career, I think I've witnessed okay, is that what we really want? Or do we want to be able to define ourselves in a bit of a different way? Or do we just want to assimilate? The questions became a little bit different from historically what had led us to that point.
Yeah, and what I'm hearing from you is, and I, what's ringing true for me right now is that when you jumped in, we still had the group that was there that lived in the struggle.
Mm-hmm.
There's a beautiful book called The Knight in Shining Armor. It's a very small book, but it talks about the knight in shining armor, comes home every day with his armor on, and of course he's out slaying dragons and rescuing damsels in distress, whatever knights do in their armor. And he can never take his armor off because it's all cheeked, and he just can't get it off. And his family never gets to know who he is because he always has his armor on, right? And that old story of without a damsel in distress or a dragon to slay, there's no worth there. Same thing like a firefighter needs a fire, kind of thing like that. Thank God that they do such great work. Gerry, it's like similar, right? I mean, we got stuck in this fight phase, or this flight or fight phase, I should say, the sympathetic phase that we just couldn't get out of on a certain level, right? And Lauren, you come around and you see, wait a minute, there's a balance between this, sympathetic and parasympathetic phase, right? Where that swimming upstream is what you were seeing it, but then you all actually probably experienced something different from what I heard you say, right?
Correct.
Where do you see it now, Lauren? I mean, obviously you're in education, you're the dean of our clinic, you're doing amazing things, where do you see the education going now?
Thank you. It's interesting. When I started school, there was a handful, very small group of people that had never been to a chiropractor before, right? That somehow had stumbled upon becoming a chiropractor and journeying on that path without having had a personal experience with it. It was very, very strange to me, having grown up with chiropractic care. And it was totally unheard of to my dad, right? Like, in his era, like you went to chiropractic school because you had a tremendous personal experience with chiropractic, or someone very close to you did, right? It wasn't, the counselors weren't talking about it in high school, of this is a potential path for you as you consider different career options. And that was starting to happen when I started school. There were a couple of people, and it was always like, really, you're going to be a chiropractor? You've never been adjusted? Like, so interesting. Now it's not that uncommon at all. Like, it's very much, people are thinking, oh, I want a career in healthcare. And they look to things like medicine, like dental school, like optometry school, like PT school, like chiropractic school. Like, it's very much just one of the things that they could potentially look into. And then there's, some compelling factor about it that strikes them. And then they find themselves here entering this world. And I think for those of us that grew up in it and are like, oh my gosh, I could never imagine living any other way. All I ever wanted to do is become a chiropractor. It's very strange. I'm like, wow, like, so you want to be a chiropractor, but you don't know anything about chiropractic except that it's part of the healing professions, and so I think it's just a very different makeup of the student body, right? So then they don't have any real ideas about chiropractic. So it's not so much that they have negative preconceived notions about it. They have no notions, which is kind of cool because then we get to help define it for them. But it's just a very different environment from, historically, where the people that were drawn to chiropractic were kind of renegade thinkers and, had some very, life-changing experience with chiropractic. And a lot of the students now have heard those stories once they get here, but they haven't seen that yet. They haven't experienced that yet. And it makes it for a cool scenario in an academic setting, because a lot of times they end up having that experience when they're here at school. And then the school environment becomes part of their life-changing experience with regard to chiropractic. And that's super, super exciting. And I love to be a part of that. And that's, my goal in chiropractic education is to really help to create a very positive experience as they enter into their, practicing lives as chiropractors.
Yeah. And, the interesting thing around that is that, and I noticed that too, by the way, because you can walk into a first quarter class these days. And Gerry, this might be a little surprising based on, it was probably happening at the tail end of your time as president, but it was, you walk into a class, say, who's been adjusted? And when I was in school, 98% of the people put their hands up, right? 99 actually, because for what you said, Lauren, that, it's like, you were referred by a chiropractor. Nowadays, it could be 50%. And this isn't just at Life West, this is anywhere, right? Because the people are going to school, undergraduate school, kinesiology major, There's no kinesiology job, so the pathway is, whatever the pathways that you shared about in the health worlds. And then they stumble upon chiropractic, whether it's through the internet or whether it's through a lecture or whatever it might be, where Gerry, in your time, you had these students come in that had this miracle, or had, were destined to be a chiropractor, so to speak, and you were able to mold them, right, and take them through the educational process and teach them vitalism and all the things that you did. And Lauren, you've got this clean slate kind of deal, where they're just open, and maybe not, maybe they might have preconceived notions that just have to kind of shift. Wow, what a paradigm, that we're seeing there, It's crazy. Gerry, when you see education right now, and I know you're not deeply involved, but you were involved over the, up until, whatever. Do you see it moving in a track that you're happy about? Because, you're one of our big leaders. You talk about Jancy and, during his time and Dr. Williams, well, during Gerry Clum's time, you were one of those figureheads. What's your thought on where education is right now?
Well, I think it's wonderful, the direction the profession has gone in terms of the self-directed learning and shifting the responsibility for learning from the faculty member to the student, and causing the faculty member to become a facilitator of learning rather than the locus of learning. The resources that are available. In 1970, 1975, a chalkboard and an overhead projector were high-tech stuff. Computers didn't exist. I remember when we got our first Scantron machine, we thought we had died and gone to heaven. And then we got a Selectric 3 typewriter, and, we thought it was the end of the earth, this technology had moved on so far. So there's no comparison, with just something as simple as PubMed, for example, what that has opened up for us and our students. And, there's simply no comparison. It was dark ages in 1970.
Yeah. And it's so interesting too, because, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Lauren, but, we don't have Scantrons anymore. And I think they decommissioned them, and somehow they got lost somewhere, but we don't have them anymore. And everything's done either on computer or everything's done on however they do. It's just so phenomenal. And yet to keep pace with it, we still have that gap, right? Because we have people in our educational system, myself included, who don't understand this new technology, that's here, right? And it's still kind of like, on the select typewriter, and there's that gap that will be filled as we go through probably the next 5 or 10 years. That'll, we'll be able to catch up people. But what I'd like to do is change gears right now, and let's move into the practice environment, because Gerry, you touched on it. You talked about, back in the 70s. There are states that weren't even licensed, talk about Louisiana being the last state to get licensed and all the different things that went around. But the practice environment for the chiropractor, right, has changed dramatically.
Yes, it has.
Yeah. Share with us. I'd like you to share with us, kind of take us where we were. And then Lauren, I'd like you to kind of, take us where we are, right now and what's happening. So Gerry, I'll turn it to you.
Well, thank you. And if you think about having, say, 16,000, 17,000 practitioners across the country in 1970, our numbers were such that we were absolutely insignificant and meaningless on the horizon. And you bring us into a period now where we're approaching 90 to 100,000 practitioners, it's a different story. Our sheer numbers have reached a tipping point where we're a meaningful contribution to the environment of healthcare, number one. And that change is a significant one that changes the accountability factors. It changes the responsibility factors. The idea when I went into practice in 1974 that I would have malpractice insurance, that was just something that would be nice to have. Now, to renew your license in a significant number of states, you have to have it. And you have to have it at significantly more meaningful levels than I ever had in practice. And, when I entered practice, my records were a 4x6 index card. And A with a circle on it meant they got an adjustment. A with a circle and a dollar sign afterwards, they made a payment. And that was the sparseness of the records was shocking in comparison. So where our levels of responsibility have gone up, our levels of accountability have gone up, they're a direct factor in terms of our meaningfulness of our role in the profession or in society at large. So as our numbers have gone up, the consequential nature of our actions and the profession in general has gone up, and there's just simply no comparison of 1975 and 2020. There's just the idea that an electronic record system would be designed to facilitate the integration of the chiropractor into the system. Get out of here. Well, what kind of silliness is that?
And you actually, Gerry, you actually saw like what students refer to as the Mercedes 80s, and I was in that, where all of a sudden, we were accepted by healthcare. I think was it 1970 something where Medicare, accepted chiropractic, right? Which was a huge thing because it kind of put us on the map. The beautiful thing around that was, what they accepted us as, the correction of subluxation, diagnosis of subluxation. But around that, the 80s came in and then people were being able to bill. It changed the landscape also, right?
Yeah. And it's part of that accountability and consequential role. When we hit the deck in those days, our numbers were so few that it wasn't worth it for an insurance company to pay any attention to managing us or dealing with us or interfacing with us. And you filled out the form, you put a stamp on it, you put it in the mail, and they sent you back a check.
Yeah.
And nobody questioned. When our numbers went up and the dollars associated with our care became meaningful, that's when everybody started looking around and saying, whoa, this is a cost center. We need to manage this. We need to change this, and so on. So we had this balance of responsibilities and accountability that came into play in that time that was a function of the economics, was a function of the changing nature of social responsibility in healthcare, and was a function of our maturation as a profession.
Yeah.
So we had all of those converging at the same time, and they brought us to the point where we are today.
Yeah, and back in those days, and listen, in my day also, it's not that it was so far back, but we had a lot of staff members. We had these bigger offices. When you were doing insurance, we might have had 2 or 3 people back in the insurance department, and we were running these like mini, like quote unquote businesses, around that. And then Lauren, we stepped in, to your time period where, HMOs were like the thought of the day, and having all these insurance companies take chiropractic, take our care wasn't necessarily the order anymore, right? ACHP and all these other companies started stepping in, and do you want to join them? Do you not? Your reimbursement is low. So it totally shifted us to a whole different level. And I'd love you to speak about that because it's more, in your wheelhouse.
Sure. So by the time I opened my practice in 2007, the advice to me was, hey, you might as well start cash because you can always start billing insurance. You can always join the networks. But if you start that way, it's really hard to go the other direction. That was what my mentors were telling me. That's what, the people that had been in practice for a long time and had seen that evolution were telling me. And so that's what I did. I started as a cash practice and it worked. And so I've never billed insurance for chiropractic care. I ran a cash practice for 11 years until I came here to Life West. So I can honestly say that, yes, you can run an upper cervical cash practice successfully, because I know that sometimes that comes into question. And it does not that it has to be upper cervical, but there's always questions around that. Oh, you can't really have a successful upper cervical practice. Oh, you can't really have a successful cash practice. And none of that is true. Like, you can have whatever kind of practice you want to have. But that's been my experience. And now coming back into the academic environment and, getting questions around billing and how to set things up. And even from a clinical operations perspective of the health center, it's not really my area of expertise because I ran a cash practice for 11 years.
Right.
So it's fine. Generally speaking, we are a cash practice here in the health center too. We do some Medicare billing. We have a little bit of PI. But it's not super different from how I practiced, but it's very interesting. So I distinctly remember being told that, like, hey, start cash because you can always jump in the pool, but once you're in the pool, it's really hard to get out. And so I'm like, cool, that sounds great. I always have that option. I can always jump in the pool if I want to. And then just, as my practice grew and I kept going, I was like, wow, I don't really think I want to jump in that pool. So it's made for a unique practice experience because I know I'm in the minority there.
And I think it also makes for an uncomplicated practice, on some level, right? Because not the insurance could be complicated if you have the right people doing it, whatever. But, I know with my kids, pre-cash practices, walk in. One of my daughters had just a huge thriving practice here in the Bay Area and didn't even have a receptionist. You just walk in, plug on the computer, you're here, wait till the table opens up, go back, and simple. They're being charged, and the file, whatever. I don't know if their credit cards are on file. I don't know how that worked around that side, but it's just interesting. And Gerry, I don't know if you remember this, but when things started switching over to the cash world, from the HMO world, or when HMO started coming in, things like that, and we started switching. What the biggest thing that I remember is that people would say, well, the reason you should go to cash was because it creates a more responsible patient. That was and Lauren, that was the kind of like the saying of the day. It's your patient's more responsible. And me being in the insurance world in the 80s and and moving up, it was almost like we were our train of thought was, yeah, but people are paying for their insurance. So if they're paying for their insurance, why should they use what they're already paying for? Why would they want to go to somebody who said, well, we don't take your insurance, we don't bill your insurance? Other people are saying, we don't take your insurance, but we'll give you a bill that you can send in, a super bill, and there was all these spaces in between, right? But as we can see now, where the progression has led us to is that, it's more profitable, it's easier, it's, less time consuming, to just be able to kind of walk out and do a cash practice, right? I mean, just, majority people, Lauren, do you see majority of new graduates and doctors now, who are in practice for 5 to 10 years, pretty much mostly cash practice?
So I'm not sure about that. No, I think that I'd say the majority of practices have a degree of billing, whether they are outsourcing their billing services. They might not have, like you were talking about, multiple staff members where they're doing in-house billing. But I think that the majority of practitioners are doing some kind of billing, either outsourcing the billing, giving their patients super bills. And in those environments, there's still an element that the practitioner is playing to the insurance company. And I don't mean to use language that indicates that that's horrible. You know what I mean? But there is still an element that it's based on the insurance company's rules and model versus the practitioners. And when we talk about, you mentioned cash practices creating a more responsible patient, and I think that it actually creates, I don't want to say a more responsibility, but it adds a level of responsibility to the practitioner because the financial relationship is between the patient and the doctor. So running a cash practice, I had to get very good at communicating with my patient the value of what they were doing because they were paying out of pocket for it, right? It wasn't in insurance environments, there's almost an element of like nobody's paying for it. It just kind of happens, And so then there's seemingly potentially less accountability between the practitioner and the patient and the practitioner. But in a cash environment where I'm asking you to pay sometimes a high fee for what I'm going to provide to you, I have to be really good at explaining that and really, really good at providing it.
Yes.
Right? There's no room for, yes, let me sell you this care plan for XYZ dollars with all of these promises and then not follow through on the promises. Right? Like we have to get really, really good. And I think it's done well for us as practitioners because it's forced us to be able to answer questions that maybe in the past we just sort of accepted. Like we knew that chiropractic worked, right? Like we have every faith in chiropractic and the body's ability to be able to heal. And being in an environment where we're asking that level of accountability from our patients has forced us into a situation to be able to really explain why what we do works. What is that brain-body connection, and how is it impacted by the chiropractic adjustment, and what affects it in the first place to cause people to need and then benefit from chiropractic care? Like, we've had to answer questions, be able to really scientifically answer questions on a different level, I think, than we've had to in the past, because of that level of accountability. And I personally think it's a fantastic thing. I think we need to own that as chiropractors. And I think the same level of accountability comes into play when we have students coming into our colleges that don't have a lot of experience with chiropractic. So they're just learning about it, and they tend to ask questions that other folks that have a history with chiropractic just sort of take for granted. They might not know the answers to those questions, but they're just like, yeah, it's just part of chiropractic. But you get other people involved that don't have that history and start asking those questions. It's our responsibility to be able to answer those questions and to be able to answer them well, so that then we can all evolve together. And I like that level of accountability that the cash environment has offered, and that the educational environment that we have now, where we're drawing more people that don't know so much about chiropractic. I think it elevates who we are as practitioners and as a profession.
Yeah, and I love what you said, because really what we're talking about is up-leveling the profession, right? And it really has up-leveled us. I mean, to the level where we could go speak with anybody. You can go speak with, we've always done this anyways, but when you own the science and the philosophy, and you have a good art, of course, you got a complete package there, and it's, I love what you said, because it's so true that, that we own what we do. Someone's going to pay us for it. We have to be able to produce it. It's not like it's coming from a third party somewhere, and, that kind of thing. And it just creates a stronger profession, stronger chiropractor, stronger chiropractic, so to speak, right?
Totally.
I love it. And it leads me into my last thing, Lauren, because there's a perfect segue, technology, because these days technology is like huge, right? Gerry, back in your day, in the 70s, and like you said, just even there were no computers, right? And you watched an evolution kind of happen, in whether it was in education or in practice, the technology that was there. So, share with us how you saw technology kind of come into our profession, right? And then, Lauren, I'd love you to share about, where you see it now, and where we might be going with it.
Well, thank you, Ron. The technology adaptation to the profession, we had this situation where we had a practice that when we did it, people's lives changed and so on. And then we wanted to backfill how. And most of the technology development was the how. And in that process, it hasn't really changed the what we do dramatically moving forward, but it's changed the how does it happen. And so we've gone down lots of paths, some of them fruitless, some of them functional, some of them very productive, that has given us options to bring different technologies into the profession. I think of things like digital X-ray, for example. Mm-hmm. What an advancement that is for us and the profession in general. So the technology advancement to me is just, it's a natural evolution. But we started down that path trying to answer how we were getting the results we were getting, and then to use that document to others why we got those results. And we continue in that fashion.
Yeah. But Gerry, you also, I think, I don't know if you were around when whether it was at Life College or Life West, like when Roy Sweat, brought his table out after he left Grostic. That might have been in the 60s or 70s. I know for sure it was not in the 80s. So it was either in the 70s or 60s. And, Pierce Stillwagon, all these different things that kind of Pettibon back in the day, all these different ways of delivering chiropractic, right? Through technology, right? Or if you could call it technology back those days, it was technology.
Yeah.
Lauren might say that, but that's technology. No, technology is this, that's technology. What did you witness as we were growing? Dr. Williams brought in the life cervical, table, all these different things that was there. What just kind of a few of them that kind of pop up in your head where you saw some people kind of leading the way with that?
Yeah. Well, the truth of the matter was that everybody wanted better results. And as good as your results were, there was always hope that you could get better. And so different theories of practice came along, different approaches to practice. And, in my day when I started school, the big debate was between Gonstead and upper cervical. Gonstead said it began from the base up, and upper cervical said it began from the top down. And how do you reconcile those two? Well, you don't. I mean, we didn't at that time. It's happened to this moment. So, each of the different technique approaches, when you say, for example, you look at CBP and they took a mathematical model, and you look at Sweat, who took an instrument model, and so on. The fundamentals of why we do what we do haven't changed dramatically. The how we do it and the rationale for what it's accomplishing has gone through all sorts of machinations and modifications. But the fundamental core thing of what we do and why we do it, it's unchanged.
Yeah.
And that, to me, is one of the great anchors of the profession, and serves us very, very well. When I say it hasn't changed, I don't mean we haven't progressed, we haven't evolved, we haven't added technology, we haven't added this, hadn't added this. I'm just saying we have, but it's always been for the same reason.
Yeah.
We want to do better.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was BJ, right? I mean, you were at the Palmer Clinics, BJ doing all the technology that he was doing back in his day, right? Was all about doing better, constantly doing better. And that's probably the most beautiful thing about our profession is we are so patient centric that it's not about the doctor. It was always about what can we do to bring better care to our patients, right? And to show that, and Lauren, how about you? So on a technology level, obviously things are quite different now, share your thoughts on it.
Sure. So I have two ideas when it comes to technology. I think that innovation in technology has allowed for us to provide a level of objectivity to our analysis that hasn't always been there, right? And so just as my dad was saying, the goal has always been to improve outcomes and to explain the outcomes that we're getting, right? And I think that advances in technology have allowed us to go from a more subjective analysis of subluxation and delivery of care to tying in objectivity, whether it's through scanning instrumentation or X-ray, digital X-ray, even better, that all of these things have helped us to refine what exactly are we looking for from an analysis perspective, have allowed us to improve the delivery of the adjustment, and then allowed us to analyze, did we do what we said we were going to do, right? So it's not that we weren't doing those things before, it's just added a level of objectivity to it. And then that too, I believe, coming back to accountability, increases our accountability because we have something that's reproducible over and over and over again. Intra, myself, I can reproduce it, and inter-examiner. It's not a word, but between examiners. And increasing that objectivity increases the outcomes over the course of time for more and more people, right? So I think technology has served us in that way. The second component, I think we would be remiss not to mention, is how social media and just the internet and how technology in that way has really upped the ante with accountability as well, because there's really very little separation now between a practitioner and their practice and who they are as a person in the community and all of the things. I was raised in chiropractic to be extremely patient-centered, and everything revolved around the patient. Every conversation revolved around the patient. Every conversation came back to chiropractic. And when I did a focus group probably about 8 years into practice with some of my favorite patients to really see what it was that they were, specifically with regard to retention, like what was it that they were continuing to come back for? one of the most interesting things that came out of that focus group was their desire to better know me. Yeah. And I was like, well, that doesn't have anything to do with it. This is about chiropractic and your progress and your outcomes. And they were like, no. A big part of our success is you, and we want to know you more. And it just, I think, I identify with Generation X and that very like separatist, private mentality of no, I'm me, and this is chiropractic for you. And I think that over the course of time, technology and innovation has kind of dissolved that we are all of it, right? And so to know chiropractic is to know the chiropractor and to know their place in the community and to be a part of that. And patients want to be a part of that. And for doctors to not share that, I think is missing a key element of that service and accountability with regard to chiropractic. And I think it ups our accountability because it does make us more visible. And so if more people are watching, we have to make sure that we're doing the right thing all of the time, right? I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing, not in a, I want the government watching me every moment kind of way, but in a, I live my life and it's visible to people. And so that demands a level of accountability that I'm okay with because I trust my service in chiropractic. Yeah. So I think, I guess I just keep coming back to accountability. So as technology continues to innovate, it ups our ante in service.
Yeah, and I love how you brought in the social media, because if you go back, Gerry, when you started practice, back in Davenport, it's like our patients were the most important people to us. And so, and whereas they weren't getting that from the other doctors that they were seeing. And so that relationship grew because we knew everything. Like Gerry, you're probably the same thing. You knew their cats, kittens, puppies' names, and yet I couldn't remember to bring home the almond milk, after a shift, at the office, right? But I walk into an office and I know every single person. I know about what their grandkids were doing, and all because we genuinely cared about them, right? And that shift then happened, Lauren. What you just said is not, nowadays it's not so much good. I'm thrilled you care about me. Please, know about me, but we want to know about you. We want to know, what do you like, Doc, and what's your life? And that's where that trust level changes. It's incredible. And the ante is up. I love what you said. The ante is up quite a bit, and I think that's part of our success also, because we are patient centric, right? And, and we just have to kind of learn to shift to be more, have some doctor centricity in there also for our patients to be able to add on to. Man, I got to tell you, 64 years. That's what you have between you. 64 years of chiropractic practice in the Clum family. That's not even counting Donald. If we added his years in practice, we're probably in 64, 84, I don't know, 85, 90 years. I really don't know. I don't know how long Donald's been practicing, but it is so cool to have both of you with us today. And I'm really tickled pink that we're able to put this together, to be able to hear your viewpoints, growing up in the same household, yet having different views and different generational, ideas. And so thank you both for being with us. I want to ask you one last question each. I'm going to restrict the answer to be a minute or less so that it gets as concise as we can possibly get. And what I want to ask is this, and Gerry, I'm going to start with you. 50 years from now, 75, I don't care what it is, from the pearly gates, you're looking down, you're hanging out with, all your friends, and you look down, where do you want to see chiropractic? As you look down, what's your vision that you want to see where chiropractic is at? Yeah.
Well, I'd like to see the profession just accepted as another part of the fabric of society, in an everyday commonplace of course, consideration. Number one. Number two, I'd like to see the value of the adjustment realized and applied to the greatest extent possible for the health and the well-being of the population. And if we can do those two things, we've secured a great advancement for society, for the profession, and for ourselves as individual practitioners.
Yeah, that's huge. That is huge. And Lauren, so, I'll say I'll say 100 years from now. So, tell us, what do you want to look down and be able to see?
Sure. I agree wholeheartedly with my dad, and I want to be able to look down and see that it's super natural for mamas to take their babies to get checked as soon as they're born, and for mamas to be getting checked, while they're delivering their babies, and that everybody in the family just gets checked by the chiropractor, because that's what produces the best, healthiest outcomes for them and provides them with the best opportunity for feeling cared for, and enhances their own personal service to our communities and to our world at large. That it's just a part of, we make healthy choices in order to serve better, right? Like as people in general, that's why we do healthy things, so that we can be ourselves better. And I see chiropractic as part of that of course we all get checked and adjusted as needed, because that's what helps us serve in our capacity as humans better.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Well, I want to thank both of you, and thank you. I think those last statements really kind of they really kind of share where we're at as a profession. And I'm just tickled pink. It's going to be like, we've got such a great future ahead of us, and with Gerry, we've had such a great past,
Yep.
and there's just, and everything in between. It's just wonderful. So I want to thank you both, Dr. Clum and Dr. Clum, for being with us. The Doctors Clum for being with the Life West Leadership Line today, and to our viewers. We could have went on for hours and hours and hours. There's so much that's in this. I want to recommend you watch it at least 3 times just to kind of grab the stuff in it, just kind of take it in. But also just remember that, if we don't know where we came from, we'll definitely not be able to direct where our future is going, right? Because we can certainly repeat the past. And at where we've grown, and I love what Gerry, what you said, the 3 phases, of chiropractic at the very beginning. And we've got a great opportunity now to step up and keep taking our profession to a higher level. And like Lauren said, it's just going to end. Gerry said it both in your endings. Just take it to that normal place where everyone just sees a chiropractor, just like you see a dentist, just like you see anybody else. You should be getting your nervous system checked. And I trust that with our generations that are coming up, that it's going to happen. I used to wonder, but I just see it now because of, everything that they have at their fingertips. So thank you both for being with us. Thank our viewers. Thank you for being with us. And we'll be coming back at you with another Life West Leadership Line in a few weeks. So keep watching, stay with us, keep sharing, these Life West Leadership Lines with others. We love and appreciate you. And until our next Life West Leadership Line, between Dr. Gerry and Dr. Lauren and myself, we'll bid you adieu. Keep loving those around you, and we'll see you next time.